I've always believed that a marriage isn't ruined in one night. It's a slow process, a collection of little moments that chip away at the respect and connection you once had. In my case, it didn't start with my wife outright humiliating me in front of people. No, it began much smaller, with subtle digs that, at first, I brushed off because I told myself she was just joking, just being playful. I remember the first time I noticed it. We were at her sister's house for a Sunday barbecue. Everyone was sitting outside, kids running around, drinks on the table, music playing, and I was telling her brother-in-law about a project I've been working on at my job. Before I could finish, she cut in with a smirk and said, "Oh, don't get him started about his work. He'll talk for hours and somehow make you think he's building the next Google." People laughed, and I forced a chuckle too. It stung, but I told myself she was just teasing. But once you start noticing something, it's hard to unsee it. The little remarks became a pattern. We'd be out with friends, and if I made a mistake telling a story or misremembered a detail, she'd jump in to correct me. Not in a gentle way, but with that tone that says, "I'm smarter than you. Let me fix this for you." At family gatherings, she'd make jokes about me not knowing how to load the dishwasher properly, or how I once got lost driving to a place we'd been to before. And every time, there was that same chuckle in the room, hers the loudest. I know what some people might say. Lighten up, it's just banter. But here's the thing. Banter is mutual. Banter is playful. This wasn't that. It was always one-directional. I never made those kinds of jokes about her. I never called her out in front of people for things she did wrong. It wasn't in my nature to try to score points at someone else's expense, especially not my wife's. At first, I told myself she was just going through a phase. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe it was her way of feeling confident in social situations. But deep down, I started feeling smaller around her. It's a hard thing to admit, but the person you share your life with has the greatest ability to shape how you see yourself. And when the person who's supposed to be in your corner keeps taking shots at you, it starts to leave marks. The real problem became clear when I realized this wasn't just happening in big gatherings. It was seeping into smaller, more intimate settings. We'd be out with just one other couple, and she'd still find a way to poke fun at me. One night, we were having dinner with our friends Mark and Rachel. I was telling a story about fixing our washing machine, something I was actually proud of because I'm not exactly a handyman, and she jumped in with, "Yeah," and it only took him 4 YouTube videos and 2 trips to Home Depot to figure out which end of the screwdriver to use. I laughed along again, but inside I felt that same familiar twist in my gut. It wasn't just the joke, it was the fact that she always seemed to take pleasure in making me the punchline. And the worst part? Our friends laughed too, which made me feel like they were in on some joke about me that I didn't even fully understand. That's when I started noticing the way people looked at me after she made these comments. It wasn't pity exactly, but it was something close. Like they saw me as less than her, as if I didn't measure up in some way. That subtle shift in perception from others hit harder than I expected. Privately, I tried to talk to her about it. I told her that the jokes were starting to bother me, that it felt like she was putting me down in front of people. She rolled her eyes and said, "Oh, come on. You're too sensitive. People know I'm just joking." And just like that, my feelings were dismissed. No apology, no acknowledgement, nothing. That conversation should have been a wake-up call for her, but instead, it seemed to make her double down. It's strange. When you're in a situation like this, you start doing mental gymnastics to justify it. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself it wasn't worth making a scene over. And most of all, I told myself that calling her out publicly would only make things worse. So I stayed quiet. I smiled through it. I kept being the good sport because that's what I thought a good husband should do. But inside, the resentment was building. I started to feel disconnected from her, not just emotionally, but physically too. When we were alone, I didn't feel like opening up about my day. I didn't feel like joking around or sharing little moments because I knew there was a good chance she'd twist it into something she could use later for a laugh at my expense. The turning point, the moment I knew something was going to break, came at a friend's birthday party. We were in a nice restaurant, maybe a dozen of us at a long table. The conversation was flowing, drinks were being poured, and everyone was in a good mood. At one point, someone asked me how things were going at work, and I started telling them about a project that had been a big win for me. Before I could get halfway through the story, she cut me off and said, "Oh, don't let him fool you. He only got that project because his boss felt sorry for him after that big mess up last quarter." The whole table laughed. I laughed too, but it wasn't real. It was the kind of laugh you do to hide the fact that your stomach just dropped. I caught one of my friends glancing at me with an uncomfortable expression, like they weren't sure whether to laugh or say something. And in that split second, something inside me shifted. I didn't know it right then, but that was the night I decided I wasn't going to let her keep doing this. That was the night I started thinking about what I could say, what truth I could reveal that would make her realize I wasn't just some easy target she could keep chipping away at. I didn't want revenge in the petty sense. I wanted something that would stop her in her tracks, something that would make her feel the same kind of vulnerability she'd been serving me on a platter for months. But I knew I couldn't just blurt it out in anger. If I was going to say something, it had to be deliberate, measured, and undeniable. It had to be at the right time, in the right place, with the right audience. And that's when I started waiting, not in a desperate way, but in the way someone waits for a storm they know is coming. By the time the right moment came, I was ready. I'd been holding on to the truth, and I knew exactly how I was going to use it. The night it all came to a head didn't feel any different at first. In fact, it started out like most of our social nights did, me driving us to the restaurant while she sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, half engaged in small talk. She had on that red dress I always thought looked stunning on her, and I couldn't help but notice she'd put more effort into her appearance than usual. I told her she looked nice, and she responded with a quick thanks without looking up. We were meeting a mix of her friends and mine, a group we'd hung out with many times before. The kind of people who knew each other's life updates without having to ask, because the stories and little gossip floated around between gatherings. The restaurant was one of those trendy spots downtown, with low lighting, exposed brick walls, and just enough noise to make private conversations feel safe, but public conversations carry. I remember walking in, hearing the clinking of glasses, the soft hum of laughter, and thinking maybe, just maybe, tonight wouldn't turn into one of those nights. We were sat near the back, at a long rectangular table. She took the seat directly across from me, which I thought was odd. Usually, she sat beside me, but I didn't think too much of it then. The first hour went smoothly. Drinks came out, appetizers were passed around, and people were sharing updates about work, family, and random stories. I stayed engaged, laughed where appropriate, and even told a short anecdote about something that had happened at the office that week. That's when it happened. Out of nowhere, the conversation shifted toward marriage, more specifically about quirks and habits in relationships. One of the guys mentioned that his wife hated how he left cabinet doors open, and another joked about how his wife was obsessed with organizing the fridge. The mood was light, playful, and then someone, I can't even remember who, turned to her and said, "Come on, what's your husband's worst habit?" She didn't hesitate. She leaned back in her chair, looked around the table with this mock serious expression, and said, "Honestly, his biggest habit is thinking he's better than he actually is." It was like the words hit me in slow motion. The laughter around the table came instantly, sharp, loud, and completely unfiltered. People didn't just chuckle, they really laughed. Some slapped the table. One of her friends even leaned forward like they were ready for her to elaborate. And she did. She started listing examples, all exaggerated or twisted, about how I supposedly brag about small accomplishments, how I act like I know everything, and how I can't admit when I'm wrong. She was performing now, feeding off the attention. I sat there, my drink in hand, my face probably unreadable to anyone who didn't know me well. But inside, I could feel something shifting, not in a loud, angry way, but in a cold, absolute way. This wasn't teasing anymore. This was a full-on public character assassination, and she was enjoying it. What made it worse was that she was doing it in a way that made her look witty and self-assured, while I was positioned as the oblivious fool. I could see the effect it was having on the others. Even the people who liked me were laughing, not because they hated me, but because that's what happens in group dynamics. You laugh along to avoid being the odd one out. In moments like that, your mind moves fast. Part of me wanted to get up and leave right then. Another part of me wanted to clap back with something equally sharp, but I knew that anything I said in that moment, in that emotional state, would just make me look defensive or petty. So instead, I just sat back, sipped my drink, and let her keep going. Let her think she was in control. Because what she didn't know, what no one at that table knew, was that I'd been sitting on something for weeks. I had found out something about her recently. Something that explained a lot about the way she'd been acting, the coldness, the little jabs. And I hadn't said a word about it to anyone. Not her, not a friend, not even my brother. I've been holding it close, waiting. And now, watching her hold court at this table, mocking me like it was her personal stand-up routine, I realized this was the moment I'd been waiting for. It's funny, when you know you have the upper hand, you don't need to rush. You don't need to raise your voice. You can just wait for the perfect opening. And that opening came when one of my friends, maybe trying to soften the blow, said, "Come on, man, you've got to have something on her too. What's your wife's worst habit?" There was this pause at the table, all eyes shifting to me. She smirked, confident I'd either say something tame or make myself look foolish. I took my time, setting my glass down slowly, and just looked at her for a moment. Not angry, not smiling, just looking. I said, I could answer that, but I think it's better if I show everyone, because sometimes the truth is more interesting than jokes. The table went quiet. She laughed awkwardly, trying to brush it off, but I didn't laugh back. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. I had the proof, texts, photos, and enough context to make it undeniable. But I didn't lay it all out right there. No, I simply mentioned a single detail that I knew would freeze her in place. I said, let's just say that while I've been working late and actually doing my job, someone's been spending a lot of evenings in places that aren't the gym like they claimed. Her face changed instantly. The smirk disappeared. She opened her mouth like she was going to speak, but nothing came out. A couple of people at the table glanced at her, confused, then back at me. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. That's when I knew I had control of the room. Not because I'd yelled, not because I'd match her insult for insult, but because I'd dropped just enough truth to shift the power dynamic completely. I didn't press further that night, not in front of everyone. I wanted the seed planted, the curiosity in their eyes, the doubt in hers. That was enough. She could sit with it. And as I sat back in my chair, sipping the last of my drink, I could feel the air had changed. The laughter was gone, replaced by that awkward tension that no amount of small talk can fix. The ride home that night was exactly what you'd imagine after something like that. Silent, but not peaceful. She didn't even look at me when we got into the car. Just stared out the passenger side window, arms crossed tight, her breathing shallow and quick. I didn't rush to fill the silence. In fact, I leaned into it. Sometimes silence says more than words ever could. Halfway home, she finally spoke. What the hell was that supposed to mean back there? Her voice was sharp, but underneath it I could hear something I hadn't heard from her in a long time. Uncertainty. I kept my eyes on the road. You know exactly what it meant. She turned toward me, her tone shifting into defensive mode. You're twisting things. You're trying to make me look bad in front of everyone because you can't take a joke. That word, joke, hit me like a slap. I pulled the car over into a quiet side street, turned to face her, and said, a joke is forgetting the punchline. A joke is tripping over your own shoelaces. What you've been doing to me for months isn't joking. It's cutting me down in front of the very people who were supposed to respect me. And you thought you'd get away with it because I'd never push back. But tonight I did. She tried to hold my gaze, but her eyes flickered, that quick, nervous darting that happens when someone knows the truth is on the table. When we got home, I didn't storm inside or slam doors. I went straight to my office, pulled my phone from my pocket, and opened the folder I'd been keeping. Screenshots, pictures, messages, all of it saved and dated. The thing is, when I first stumbled on her betrayal, I didn't believe it. I found a few late-night messages on her phone weeks earlier. Flirty, suggestive, definitely not friendship material. At first, I thought maybe it was some dumb online attention-seeking thing. But then I started paying attention. Her gym nights were lasting longer. She'd come home with her hair still damp, not from shower, but from sweat. And there were little changes. New lingerie she never wore around me. inside jokes she wouldn't explain, her phone suddenly locked with a password I didn't know. I could have confronted her then, but a confrontation in private would have ended like every other disagreement. Her flipping it back on me, claiming I was insecure or paranoid. So I stayed quiet. I gathered proof. I made sure that if I ever spoke, I wouldn't be brushed off. And that dinner, that was my breaking point. Not because of the words she said, but because she looked so comfortable doing it. Like she thought she was untouchable. The next morning, I made coffee like usual. I didn't bring up the night before. I didn't give her the satisfaction of knowing whether or not I was going to make a move. But around 10 a.m., I sent a single group text to her sister, her best friend, and two of the people from the dinner. It read, "Since we're all apparently comfortable discussing each other's private lives in public, I thought you should all see the full picture." Then I attached a series of screenshots. Nothing obscene, but enough to make the point. Her messages with him, the flirty nicknames, the late night, "When can I see you again?" and "I can't wait until your wife is asleep" texts. I didn't need to add commentary. The timestamps, the words, the emojis, they told the story without me having to. Within minutes, my phone was lighting up. Calls, messages, her best friend texting me. I had no idea. Her sister saying, "Oh my God, is this real?" And from her, a single, desperate, "Why would you do this?" Why? Because for months, she had been slowly tearing me down in front of the people we knew. Because she'd been gambling on the idea that I'd never stand up for myself. And because when she humiliated me in that restaurant, she gave me the perfect audience to make sure the truth hit hard. She came storming into my office, phone in hand, tears already running. "You've ruined my life," she screamed. I stayed seated, calm as ever. "No, I just stopped letting you ruin mine." She tried to bargain then, tried to explain how it wasn't serious, how she wasn't thinking straight. She threw every excuse at me. Loneliness, boredom, wanting attention. I let her talk. And when she was done, I told her it didn't matter whether she slept with him once, 10 times, or never at all. The intent was enough. The disrespect was enough. And that was it. I packed a bag that afternoon and left. Not to punish her, not to make her chase me, but because I was done living in a house where I was the punchline. The fallout was exactly what you'd expect. Some friends distanced themselves from her. Others stayed neutral, but definitely saw her differently. Her family, the ones who had laughed along at some of her jokes, now had to sit with the fact that those jokes were coming from someone living a lie. Weeks later, I heard through the grapevine that the guy she'd been talking to had ghosted her completely. Apparently, he wanted the thrill but not the drama. And without him, without me, without the social safety net of our friends seeing her as the clever one, she started reaching out. First, a casual text, then a long, emotional email about missing what we had, then a late-night call where she was crying, saying she made a mistake. I didn't respond to any of it, because by then, I'd realized something important. You don't win by making someone feel as bad as they made you feel. You win by walking away so completely that they can't touch you anymore. And the truth? I wasn't even angry anymore. I was free. Free from the constant undercurrent of disrespect. Free from walking into social situations wondering what jab she'd throw next. Free from the tightrope of trying to keep a marriage alive when one person is actively undermining it. Sometimes the loudest statement you can make isn't an explosion. It's the quiet act of leaving, with your dignity intact, and the other person left to deal with the wreckage they created. And that's exactly what I did.